Your birds are getting sick. One by one. First it's just sneezing. Then you notice watery eyes. Then the breathing becomes labored. You treat with antibiotics. The symptoms disappear for a week, then return. You clean the loft top to bottom. You disinfect every surface. Nothing changes, and you wonder why. The answer is above your head and behind your walls. It's in the air your birds breathe 24 hours a day. It's invisible. It's odorless until it's too late. And 90% of fanciers make the same mistake with it. That mistake is ventilation, or more precisely, the lack of proper ventilation. Before we go further, I need to tell you about something that can transform your loft management completely. Hit that subscribe button right now, and more importantly, click the bell icon to become a member of our channel. Why? Because members get access to our exclusive training videos, detailed guides, and comprehensive natural feeding formulas that we don't share anywhere else. We have an entire library of educational content covering every aspect of pigeon health, from disease prevention to breeding protocols to seasonal care strategies. This content is only available to channel members. And if you want to take your natural pigeon care even further, we also have our dedicated Pigeon Healthy channel, where we dive deep into herbal remedies, botanical formulas, and plant-based health systems used by champion fanciers across Europe. The link is in the description. Subscribe there too, because we publish natural health protocols every single week. Now back to the silent killer in your loft. Ventilation. You walk into your loft, it looks clean. The perches are scraped. The floor is swept. The feeders are full. Everything appears perfect. But within 30 seconds, your eyes start to water. There's a slight burning sensation in your nose. Your throat feels scratchy. You assume this is normal. It's a pigeon loft. Of course there's a smell. But this is not normal. This is ammonia. And if you can smell it, if your eyes are reacting to it, your birds are being poisoned. Ammonia is a gas produced when bacteria break down the uric acid in bird droppings. In small concentrations, it's harmless. But in enclosed spaces with poor ventilation, it accumulates. Ammonia is heavier than air, so it settles in the lower portions of the loft where your birds spend most of their time. At concentrations as low as 25 parts per million, ammonia begins damaging the respiratory tract. At 50 parts per million, it causes permanent lung damage. At 100 parts per million, it can be fatal. But here's the insidious part. You cannot smell ammonia at 25 parts per million. You cannot smell it at 35 parts per million. Your nose only detects it when concentrations reach 50 parts per million or higher. By the time you smell it, your birds have already been breathing toxic air for weeks. The damage is cumulative. The cells lining the respiratory tract, the cilia that sweep mucus and debris out of the lungs, are destroyed by ammonia exposure. Once these cells are damaged, the lungs cannot clean themselves effectively. Bacteria, viruses, and fungal spores that would normally be expelled now settle in the lungs and multiply. Respiratory infections become chronic. Canker thrives, performance drops, birds die. And the worst part? You blame the disease. You blame the bacteria. You blame bad luck. You never blame the air. Let's talk about the two most common ventilation mistakes and why they're killing your birds. Mistake number 1, the sealed loft. Many fanciers believe that keeping the loft warm and sealed protects birds from cold weather. This is catastrophically wrong. Birds are not humans. They do not need heated environments. A healthy pigeon can withstand temperatures well below freezing as long as it has proper feather condition, adequate nutrition, and this is critical, dry, fresh air. What birds cannot tolerate is stale, humid, ammonia-laden air. When you seal the loft to keep warmth in, you trap moisture. Every time a bird breathes, it releases water vapor. Every dropping adds moisture. Every drinker spills a few drops. In a sealed loft, this moisture has nowhere to go. Humidity rises. Condensation forms on walls and ceilings. Water drips onto perches and floors. Everything becomes damp. Damp conditions are perfect for pathogens. Bacteria thrive. Fungal spores multiply. Parasite eggs survive longer. And the birds breathing in this toxic soup day after day become chronically ill. Their immune systems are constantly fighting low-level infections. They never reach peak health. They never perform at their best. And when race season comes, they fail. The solution is not to seal the loft. The solution is proper ventilation. Constant, gentle air movement that removes moisture, dilutes ammonia, and brings in fresh oxygen without creating drafts that chill the birds. Mistake number 2, the wide-open loft. Some fanciers take the opposite approach. They open every window, every door, every vent. They believe that maximum airflow equals maximum health. This is also wrong. Direct wind creates drafts. A draft is not the same as ventilation. Ventilation is gentle, consistent air movement. A draft is a focused stream of cold air that chills specific areas. Birds caught in a draft cannot maintain body temperature. They burn extra calories just staying warm. Their energy reserves deplete. Their immune function drops. They become susceptible to infections, not because of cold air, but because of the metabolic stress of fighting constant chilling. Furthermore, Open lofts expose birds to wild bird contact. Sparrows, starlings, and pigeons from other lofts can enter freely, bringing diseases with them. Open lofts also allow predators easier access. Rats, weasels, snakes, even cats can slip through large openings. The solution is not to seal everything shut, and it's not to leave everything open. The solution is controlled ventilation, strategically placed vents that create passive airflow without creating direct wind exposure. So what does proper ventilation look like? Proper ventilation is based on a simple principle. Warm air rises, cool air sinks. This is called the stack effect or chimney effect. When you design your loft ventilation around this natural phenomenon, you create airflow without fans, without electricity, without constant adjustment. Here's how it works. Install high vents near the roofline on opposite walls, typically north and south walls, if your loft orientation allows. These vents should be at least 6 feet off the ground, preferably at the highest point of the wall just below the roofline. The north vent allows fresh, cool air to enter. The south vent allows warm, stale air to exit. Why this works? Inside the loft, the bird's body heat warms the air. Warm air is less dense than cold air, so it rises toward the ceiling. As warm air accumulates near the roof, it creates positive pressure. It wants to escape. The high south vent provides an exit route. As warm air flows out the south vent, it creates negative pressure inside the loft. This negative pressure pulls fresh air in through the north vent. The result is constant, gentle air circulation driven entirely by temperature differences. No fans, no electricity, no noise, just physics. But there are critical details that determine whether this system works or fails. Detail number 1. Vent size and placement. The vents must be large enough to allow significant airflow, but not so large that they create drafts. A general rule: for every 10 square meters of loft floor space, you need at least 0.1 square meters of ventilation area. For a 40 square meter loft, this means roughly 0.4 square meters, or 4,000 square centimeters, of total vent area split between intake and exhaust vents. But simply cutting large holes in your walls is not enough. The vents must be positioned correctly. Intake vents, the ones bringing fresh air in, should not point directly at perches or nest boxes. Direct airflow onto resting birds creates drafts and stress. Instead, position intake vents so air enters above the birds or to the side, then gently descends and circulates through the space. Exhaust vents, the ones letting stale air out, should be positioned at the highest point possible. Remember, you want to remove the warm, ammonia-laden air that naturally accumulates near the ceiling. If your exhaust vent is too low, the contaminated air above it never escapes. Detail number 2, vent design. A simple hole in the wall is not a vent, it's a hole. Proper vents have 2 essential features: protection from direct weather and adjustability. Protection means the vent has a hood or baffle that prevents rain from blowing directly into the loft while still allowing air to pass. Many fanciers use simple wooden hoods. A small angled roof positioned 6 inches above the vent opening. Rain hits the hood and runs off. Air flows underneath. This design costs almost nothing and works perfectly. Adjustability means you can control airflow based on seasonal conditions. In summer, you want maximum ventilation to remove heat and moisture. In winter, you want reduced but not eliminated ventilation enough to maintain air quality without creating excessive heat loss. Adjustable vents have sliding panels or louvers that you can open wider or close partially based on conditions. Some fanciers use commercially available turbine vents, the spinning roof vents you see on industrial buildings. These work on the same principle but add mechanical assistance. Wind hitting the turbine causes it to spin, which creates suction that pulls air out of the loft. These are effective but not necessary. Properly designed passive vents work just as well without moving parts that can break or freeze. Detail number 3, cross ventilation versus stack ventilation. The system I described, high vents on opposite walls, creates cross ventilation combined with stack effect. This is ideal for most lofts, but in some situations, pure stack ventilation is better. Pure stack ventilation uses a single large intake vent low on one wall and a single large exhaust vent high on the opposite wall or in the roof. Cool air enters low, warms as it circulates through the loft, and exits high. This creates a very gentle upward airflow pattern that continuously refreshes the air without creating noticeable drafts. The disadvantage of pure stack ventilation is that it's less effective in mild weather when temperature differences are small. In hot summer conditions or cold winter conditions, stack effect is strong. But in spring and fall, when outdoor and indoor temperatures are similar, airflow slows significantly. Cross ventilation solves this problem by adding horizontal airflow driven by external breezes. Even a light wind hitting the north wall creates slight positive pressure that pushes air into the loft through the north vent. This air must exit somewhere, so it flows out the south vent. Result: continuous airflow even when temperature differences are minimal. The best loft designs combine both principles. High vents on opposite walls provide cross ventilation when breezes are present, and stack ventilation when air is still. Now let's talk about what doesn't work. Floor vents do not work. Some fanciers cut vents near the floor thinking this will provide fresh air at bird level. This fails for two reasons. First, cool air entering at floor level does not circulate upward. It simply pools near the floor, creating a cold layer that chills the birds. Second, floor vents allow rodents easy access to the loft. Rats and mice can squeeze through surprisingly small openings. A floor vent is an invitation. Fans do not solve ventilation problems. Many fanciers install electric fans, thinking this will improve air quality. But fans only move air around inside the loft. They do not bring in fresh air or remove contaminated air. A fan in a poorly ventilated loft just circulates ammonia, moisture, and pathogens. You need actual air exchange, fresh air coming in, stale air going out. Fans can supplement this process but cannot replace it. Door ventilation is insufficient. Opening the loft door during the day provides some air exchange, but the moment you close the door at night, ventilation stops. Birds spend 12 to 14 hours at night breathing recycled air. By morning, ammonia and moisture levels have risen significantly. Proper ventilation must be continuous, day and night, all year. Now let's address humidity, because this is where most fanciers fail without realizing it. Ideal humidity for a pigeon loft is between 50 and 65%. Below 50%, the air becomes too dry, which irritates respiratory membranes and increases dust levels. Above 70%, moisture becomes a problem. Condensation forms, droppings stay damp, and pathogens thrive. In most climates, outdoor humidity naturally falls within this range. The problem is not outdoor air, it's what happens to that air inside the loft. Without proper ventilation, humidity skyrockets. A single pigeon produces roughly 50 milliliters of water per day through respiration and droppings. A loft with 50 birds produces 2.5 liters of water every day. Where does this water go? Into the air. In a sealed loft, it has nowhere else to go. High humidity has multiple harmful effects. First, it promotes the growth of respiratory pathogens, bacteria, fungi, and mold spores. Studies in poultry housing have shown that respiratory disease incidence doubles when humidity rises above 70%. The same principle applies to pigeons. Second, high humidity causes droppings to remain moist longer, which accelerates ammonia production. Dry droppings produce minimal ammonia. Wet droppings are ammonia factories. Proper ventilation removes moisture before it can saturate the droppings, dramatically reducing ammonia levels. Third, high humidity makes it harder for birds to thermoregulate. Birds cool themselves by evaporating moisture from their respiratory tracts. They cannot sweat. In high humidity conditions, evaporation slows. The bird must work harder to cool down, using extra energy and creating metabolic stress. This is why birds pant heavily on hot, humid days. They're struggling to dissipate heat. The solution is simple: ventilation. Continuous air exchange replaces humid indoor air with drier outdoor air. Even in climates where outdoor humidity is high, air movement prevents moisture from accumulating to harmful levels. How do you measure humidity? Use a digital hygrometer. These devices cost less than $10, provide instant readings of temperature and humidity. Place one hygrometer at perch level in the center of your loft. Check it daily. If humidity consistently exceeds 70%, you have a ventilation problem. If humidity drops below 45%, you may have too much ventilation or your climate is naturally very dry, in which case you might need to add moisture sources like wet floor bedding in specific areas. Now let's talk about ammonia testing, because you cannot rely on your nose. Human noses detect ammonia at roughly 50 parts per million, but damage begins at 25 parts per million. By the time you smell it, your birds have been suffering for weeks. The solution is objective testing. Commercial ammonia test strips are available, designed for livestock facilities. These colorimetric strips change color based on ammonia concentration. You hold the strip in your loft for the specified time, usually 15 to 30 seconds, then compare the color to a reference chart. If ammonia exceeds 25 parts per million, you need better ventilation or more frequent cleaning. A simpler but less precise method, the eye test. Your eyes are more sensitive to ammonia than your nose. If you enter your loft and within 30 seconds your eyes begin to water or sting, ammonia levels are dangerously high. This is not a comfortable test, but it's immediate and costs nothing. The goal is to maintain ammonia below 25 parts per million at all times. Achieving this requires two things: proper ventilation and proper loft management. Loft management means cleaning frequency and bedding choice. Let's address bedding first, because this is another area where fanciers make critical mistakes. The best loft floor bedding is wood shavings, specifically large flake pine or spruce shavings, not sawdust, not straw, not hay. Large flake wood shavings have several properties that make them ideal. First, they absorb moisture effectively. Droppings that land on shavings dry quickly because the moisture wicks into the wood. Dry droppings produce minimal ammonia and do not support bacterial growth. Second, they provide cushioning, which reduces foot injuries and pressure sores on the keel bone when birds rest on the floor. Third, they have a pleasant natural scent that partially masks mild odors without creating harmful chemical exposure. Some fanciers use aromatic cedar shavings, but this is risky. Cedar contains oils that can irritate bird respiratory systems. Pine and spruce are safer choices. Fourth, they break down slowly, which means you can maintain a deep litter system. Deep litter is a management technique where you keep adding fresh shavings on top of old shavings rather than removing everything weekly. The bottom layers compost slowly, generating mild heat that helps keep the loft dry. Every 3 to 4 months, you remove the entire litter and start fresh. This system reduces labor and actually improves loft conditions if managed correctly. However, deep litter only works with proper ventilation. Without airflow, the composting process creates humidity and ammonia instead of beneficial heat. Do not attempt deep litter unless your ventilation is excellent. Straw and hay are poor choices for loft bedding. They absorb less moisture than wood shavings. They break down quickly into dust. They harbor mites and mold spores. They compact into hard mats that are difficult to clean. Some old-school fanciers insist on straw because that's how it was always done, but modern research clearly shows wood shavings are superior. Sawdust is also problematic. It's too fine, it creates clouds of dust when birds move, which irritates respiratory systems. It tracks into water containers, contaminating drinking water. And ironically, despite being wood-based, sawdust absorbs moisture less effectively than large flake shavings because it compacts into an impermeable layer. Some fanciers use no bedding at all, preferring bare concrete or wood floors that are scraped daily. This can work, but it requires extraordinary discipline. A single day of neglect, a forgotten scraping session, and ammonia levels spike. Bedding provides a buffer that forgives minor lapses in cleaning schedule. Now let's talk about cleaning frequency because this directly interacts with ventilation effectiveness. With excellent ventilation and proper bedding, you can maintain a healthy loft with weekly deep cleaning and daily dropping board scraping. Deep cleaning means removing all droppings from the floor, scraping perches, and adding fresh bedding. Dropping board scraping means removing accumulated droppings from flat surfaces under perches. These are the droppings that produce the most ammonia if left to accumulate. With poor ventilation, even daily cleaning is insufficient. Without air exchange, ammonia accumulates faster than you can clean it away. The droppings themselves are not the only source. Ammonia continues to evaporate from any residue left on surfaces, even after scraping. Only ventilation can dilute and remove this gas. The relationship between cleaning and ventilation is synergistic. Good ventilation makes cleaning more effective by quickly removing the ammonia released when you disturb droppings during cleaning. Good cleaning reduces the ammonia load that ventilation must handle. Together, they maintain excellent air quality. Separately, neither is sufficient. Now here's something critical that almost no one talks about: seasonal adjustment. Your ventilation needs change with the seasons, but the changes are not what most fanciers expect. In summer, the obvious need is heat removal. Lofts can become dangerously hot, especially if they have metal roofs or are poorly insulated. High temperatures stress birds, reduce appetite, and slow growth in young birds. The solution is maximum ventilation, all vents fully open, even adding temporary openings if necessary. But summer also brings humidity problems, especially in coastal or tropical climates. Morning dew, afternoon rain showers, high ambient humidity, all of these increase moisture load in the loft. Counterintuitively, you need more ventilation on humid summer days than on hot, dry days, even if the temperature is lower, because humidity is more harmful than heat. In winter, most fanciers make the mistake of closing vents to keep the birds warm. This is wrong. Birds do not need warm lofts, they need dry lofts. A pigeon with good feather condition can survive temperatures down to -20°C without distress, as long as it's dry and out of direct wind. Winter actually requires nearly as much ventilation as summer, for different reasons. In cold weather, warm moist air inside the loft meets cold surfaces, walls, ceilings, windows, and condenses. Water droplets form. Ice may even develop on particularly cold surfaces. This moisture creates perfect conditions for respiratory pathogens. The solution is not to heat the loft. This worsens condensation by increasing the temperature differential. The solution is ventilation to remove the moisture-laden air before it can condense. Winter ventilation should be adjusted slightly. Reduce the vent openings to maintain some heat retention, but never close them completely. Even in the coldest climates, maintain at least 30% of summer vent capacity throughout winter. Spring and fall are transition seasons where fanciers often get lazy with ventilation management. The weather is mild, the birds seem comfortable, and it's easy to forget about air quality. But spring brings specific challenges. Molting season produces enormous amounts of feather dust, and breeding season creates extra moisture from more frequent droppings and crop milk feeding. Fall brings different challenges. Young birds are crowding the loft, increasing bird density and waste production, and cool nights with warm days create condensation cycles. Both seasons require attentive ventilation management. Check humidity levels daily. Adjust vents based on readings, not assumptions. Now let's talk about the champion secrets. the specific ventilation techniques used by Europe's top fanciers. Leo Heremans, Belgium's legendary fancier, has a ventilation system that has remained unchanged for 30 years. He uses high louvered vents on north and south walls, each vent measuring 80 centimeters by 20 centimeters. The louvers are set at a fixed angle that allows maximum airflow while preventing rain entry. He never adjusts them seasonally. The system works year-round, he says. In summer, hot air rises and exits faster, creating more airflow. In winter, airflow is gentler, but it never stops. I've never had condensation, never had ammonia problems. His key insight, consistency. The birds adapt to the conditions. Constantly adjusting vents creates fluctuating conditions that stress birds more than steady, slightly cool temperatures. Louis van der Velde takes a different approach. He uses a floor bedding system of wood shavings mixed with dried herbs, primarily eucalyptus leaves and thyme. The herbs absorb moisture and release natural antimicrobial compounds into the air. He explains, "My loft always smells fresh, and I've noticed respiratory infections are rare." He adds fresh herb shaving mixture weekly and removes the entire bedding monthly. His key insight, the loft environment is not just air quality and humidity, it's also the biological compounds present in the air. Natural antimicrobial volatiles from plants create a hostile environment for pathogens. Gaston Van de Wouwer, who has won multiple national races, uses a time-based ventilation routine. He opens the main loft door from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. every morning, creating maximum air exchange during those hours. At 10 a.m. he closes the door, leaving only the permanent high vents open for the rest of the day and night. 4 hours of intensive air exchange every morning removes all the accumulated overnight moisture and ammonia, he says. The rest of the day, passive ventilation maintains conditions. His key insight, intensive periodic ventilation may be more effective than constant moderate ventilation because it creates complete air turnover rather than gradual mixing. Marcel Wouwers uses a unique system he calls breathing walls. He constructed his loft with double wall panels, an inner wall and an outer wall with a 10-centimeter gap between them. The gap has ventilation slots at the bottom and top. Air enters the bottom slots, travels up through the gap, and exits at the top. The loft walls themselves become part of the ventilation system. The airflow prevents condensation from ever forming on the inner wall surface, he says, and it creates an insulation effect. The loft stays cooler in summer and warmer in winter without compromising air quality. His key insight, ventilation and insulation are not opposing goals. They can be integrated into a single design that achieves both simultaneously. Now let's address something that needs to be said directly. If your birds are getting respiratory infections despite your best efforts at cleaning and feeding, the problem is almost certainly ventilation, not vitamins, not supplements, not stronger antibiotics. Air respiratory disease in pigeons follows predictable patterns. Mycoplasma infections cause watery eyes and nasal discharge. Aspergillosis causes labored breathing and voice changes. E. coli causes sinusitis and swollen faces. Canker causes throat lesions and difficulty swallowing. Ornithosis causes general respiratory distress and lethargy. These are different pathogens with different symptoms, but they share one commonality. They all thrive in poorly ventilated lofts. They are all opportunistic. They exist in the environment constantly, but they only cause disease when the bird's respiratory defenses are weakened. And respiratory defenses are weakened by continuous exposure to ammonia, humidity, and stale air. You can treat these infections with antibiotics. The symptoms will disappear. But if the underlying air quality problem is not resolved, the infections return. The birds become chronically infected, constantly on the edge of illness, never quite healthy. Their immune systems are always fighting, which means they never have energy for peak athletic performance. Champion fanciers understand this. They spend more time thinking about ventilation than about medications. Their birds rarely get sick not because of superior genetics, though good genetics help, but because the environment does not stress the respiratory system. Here is a practical test you can perform right now to assess your loft ventilation. The smoke test. Purchase a smoke canister, the type used for detecting air leaks in homes. You can find these at hardware stores. On a calm day with no wind, close all loft doors and windows, except your permanent vents. Activate the smoke canister and place it in the center of the loft at floor level. Watch the smoke. If your ventilation is working correctly, the smoke should rise to the ceiling, drift toward the exhaust vent, and exit within 60 to 90 seconds. Fresh air entering through the intake vent should gradually clear the remaining smoke over the next few minutes. If the smoke simply sits in layers, not moving, your ventilation is inadequate. If the smoke swirls chaotically, you have draft problems. If the smoke lingers for more than 5 minutes, your air exchange rate is too slow. This test is visual and immediate. It shows exactly how air moves or doesn't move through your loft. Many fanciers are shocked when they perform this test and discover that their ventilated loft actually has almost no air movement. The solution depends on what the smoke reveals. No movement means insufficient vent size or poor vent placement. You need larger vents or vents positioned to better capture the stack effect. Chaotic movement means drafts. You need to baffle the intake vents to create gentler airflow. Slow movement means your vent locations are correct but too small. Increase vent area by 50% and retest. Now let's talk about a natural support system that can help if you're in the process of improving your ventilation, but your birds are already showing respiratory stress. This is where Pigeon Healthy protocols become essential. At Pigeon Healthy, we've developed a natural respiratory support formula using eucalyptus leaf and thyme steam treatments. This is not a substitute for proper ventilation. Nothing replaces fresh air, but it provides immediate relief while you're implementing long-term ventilation improvements. If you write ventilation in the comments below, I will share our complete eucalyptus thyme steam protocol in a pinned comment. This protocol includes exact measurements, preparation methods, frequency of use, and safety warnings. It's a technique used in multiple champion lofts across Belgium and Netherlands when birds show early respiratory stress signals. The science behind it is straightforward. Eucalyptus contains cineol, a compound that opens airways and has antimicrobial properties. Thyme contains thymol, which kills respiratory pathogens and reduces inflammation. When these herbs are steeped in hot water, they release volatile compounds into the air. Birds breathing this steam-infused air receive direct therapeutic benefit. This is not medicine. This is environmental modification using botanical compounds. And it works as a bridge treatment while you fix the underlying ventilation problem. Remember, on our Pigeon Healthy channel, we have an entire series on natural respiratory support, not just herbs but loft design modifications, bedding choices, and seasonal management strategies that reduce respiratory disease without any pharmaceutical intervention. Subscribe to that channel using the link in the description. We publish new natural health content every week, and members get access to our complete protocol library. Now back to ventilation solutions. Let's talk about retrofitting existing lofts, because most fanciers are not building new lofts from scratch. They're working with structures that already exist and have ventilation problems. Retrofitting starts with assessment. You need to know what you're working with before you can improve it. Measure your loft dimensions. Calculate the floor area. Determine your current vent area. Use the formula, total vent area should equal at least 1% of floor area. For a 40 square meter loft, you need at least 0.4 square meters of vent area, 4,000 square centimeters total, split between intake and exhaust. If you have less than this, you need more vents. If you have enough vent area but still have problems, the issue is vent placement, not size. Adding vents to existing walls is straightforward. Mark the desired location using the principles already discussed. High placement on opposite walls. Protected from direct weather. Adjustable if possible. Use a drill and jigsaw to cut the openings. Install louvered vent covers. These are available at building supply stores in various sizes. Seal the edges with exterior-grade caulk to prevent rain infiltration around the vent frame. If cutting holes in walls is not feasible, for example, if you're renting the loft space, consider ridge vents in the roof. Ridge vents run along the peak of a peaked roof and allow hot air to escape naturally. These are highly effective but require roof access and basic carpentry skills. Professional installation is recommended if you're not comfortable working at heights. Another retrofit option, remove solid doors and replace them with screen doors. A screen door provides security while allowing constant airflow. This is particularly effective for lofts that have only one or two small vents. The screen door dramatically increases total ventilation area without requiring wall modifications. For lofts with condensation problems, consider adding vapor barriers to the ceiling. Condensation occurs when warm, moist air contacts cold surfaces. A vapor barrier, typically a layer of foam board insulation with an impermeable face, prevents interior air from reaching the cold ceiling surface. This does not eliminate the need for ventilation, but it does prevent the moisture from condensing inside the loft, which reduces humidity and mold growth. Now let's talk about monitoring, because you cannot manage what you don't measure. Install a temperature and humidity data logger in your loft. These devices cost $20 to $40 and record conditions every hour. At the end of each week, download the data and review it. Look for patterns. Does humidity spike at certain times? Does temperature fluctuate widely? Are there conditions that correlate with the onset of respiratory symptoms in your birds? This data-driven approach transforms loft management from guesswork to science. You see exactly what's happening, when it's happening, and how your interventions affect conditions. For example, you might discover that humidity peaks at 3 a.m. every night, even though your vents are open. This tells you that nighttime air exchange is insufficient. Solution: increase vent openings slightly, or add a small passive turbine vent on the roof to boost nighttime exhaust. Or you might discover that temperature spikes dangerously high on sunny afternoons, even with vents open. This tells you that radiant heat through the roof is overwhelming your ventilation capacity. Solution: add reflective insulation under the roof, or install a ridge vent to allow hot air trapped at the roof peak to escape. Without data, these problems remain invisible. You suspect something is wrong, but you don't know what or when. With data, you see the problem clearly and can implement targeted solutions. Now let's address the role of population density, because this directly affects ventilation requirements. Ventilation calculations are based on bird numbers, not just loft size. A 40 square meter loft housing 20 birds requires half the ventilation of the same loft housing 40 birds. Because each bird produces moisture, body heat, and ammonia. A 40 square meter loft should house no more than 40 birds, and 30 birds is better. Overcrowding creates conditions where even excellent ventilation cannot maintain air quality, because the bird load exceeds the system's capacity. If you must house more birds than this, for example, during late breeding season when you have many young birds, you have two options. Increase ventilation capacity temporarily or reduce bird density by moving some birds to another structure. Temporary ventilation increase can be as simple as opening doors and windows during the day and using portable fans at night to boost air movement. This is not ideal long-term, but it prevents acute air quality problems during peak population periods. Better solution: plan your breeding schedule to avoid extreme population peaks. Stagger breeding so that older birds are sold or moved to separate housing before the next round of breeding begins. This keeps population within the loft's ventilation capacity year-round. Now let's talk about the interaction between ventilation and disease resistance from a biological perspective, because understanding the mechanisms makes the importance undeniable. The respiratory system is the primary route of infection for most pigeon diseases. Birds do not have noses that filter air effectively like mammals do. They have relatively direct airways from the environment to their lungs. This makes them efficient at gas exchange, crucial for the metabolic demands of flight, but also makes them vulnerable to airborne pathogens. The body's defense is the mucociliary escalator. The respiratory tract is lined with cells that produce mucus, and cells covered in tiny hair-like structures called cilia. The cilia beat in coordinated waves, moving mucus and trapped particles upward toward the throat, where they are swallowed and destroyed by stomach acid. This system is constantly working, clearing thousands of bacteria, fungal spores, and dust particles every hour. Ammonia destroys this system. Even at concentrations as low as 25 parts per million, ammonia causes the cilia to slow down. At 50 parts per million,